get started now. It is just past 6:30, and we like to be as close to advertised as possible. My name is Ellen Oakes. I'm one of the vice presidents of the newly formed League of Women Voters Greater Chippewa Valley, and we have here our two co-presidents, which is, where did Kits go? Kits Cleary and Margie Hageman. And my job is forums, so that's why you see so much of me. I want to welcome all of you here. This looks like a good crowd. It looks like it's going to be a great event. We're establishing a reputation in Dunn County, well, in District 29 and in Dunn County and in Menominee for really interesting forums. So I expect that you will live up to that. It's a great day to have such a forum because this is National Voter Day. And you may notice we have our voter services table back here if you have any questions about registering to vote or anything like that. Because we are a new league, we are pretty poverty-stricken. Most of the dues people pay to be a member go to the state and national. So we do have a little donation box there. I'll just mention that once. I want to point out to you that we have three different members of the media here today. We have the Eau Claire leader, and the gentleman's name is Ben. We have Dunn County News, that's Barb Lyons. And we have Steve Hansen, who is from Wisp Community. He'll be taping this event. Am I making lots of buzzing noises with the mic?
No.
No, it's good? Okay, it feels like it to me, so. All right, so, if you've been here before, you know what our guidelines are. You won't be asking your question out loud to the candidate. You'll be writing it on the piece of the card that you got with pencil. And we have question collectors, two of them. Linda and Tom Walsh will be picking those up. Just raise your card up if you want it picked up. And then we will be sorting them out so we aren't asking the same question 6 times over here at this table. And then they'll feed those to me and I'll be asking the candidates. But okay, one more thing I have to squeeze in here. I got all kinds of last minute notes. We do have another forum scheduled for District 67. And that will be on October 22nd. So this is not our last game this year at all. We have timekeepers who will be watching the candidates, that the candidates live up to the time required. When their opening statement is made, that's 3 minutes. When a question is asked of them, they each get 2 minutes to answer. So we do have people who will be showing them whether they're running over. You may have noticed there's a table outside the door. That's where we put campaign material. That doesn't come into this room. I think we've covered everything, but I want to introduce to you the two candidates that we have here tonight for Assembly District 29. And there are 3 candidates on the ballot, but Brian Correa, thank you. I always am afraid I'm going to pronounce that wrong. Brian Correa let us know last night he could not be here. So we have here today Rob Staffsholt, who is the current assemblyman for District 29, and we have John Rocco Calabrese, who is running also for the same office. And we are going to start by getting them to draw to see who gets to speak first.
We can draw on the board.
Yeah, well, that's true.
Oh, I got one.
I got one.
I got 2.
We got number 2.
So John Calabrese will be speaking first. You need to turn the mic on, John.
How's that sound, everybody?
Great.
Is there enough corn to go behind? There you go.
We have tea in a question. I have other things to do.
Yes.
Now, does it still work?
Yes.
Great. All right. Now, just don't strangle anybody.
Just on the odd chance we disagree, I don't want to have you over.
All right. Okay, shall we begin then? Fantastic. Thank you everybody for coming. Thank you to the League of Women Voters for organizing this, and happy voter registration day, everybody. My name is John. I live here in Menominee with my wife and 2 kids. I'm a woodworker, and I'm running to represent the people of the 29th Assembly District and the state of Wisconsin as well. And it seems like it should be a common refrain for candidates, but in my opinion, that's a rarity these days. I spent years volunteering with a group trying to get money out of politics. It was a statewide group. I became the state director, and we had people on that group who were conservative and liberal and independent and everywhere in between. And on our weekly conference calls, we realized we were running into a wall, a big red brick Republican wall in Madison. And despite the fact that 90% of people are in favor of doing something about money in politics, we never got one single Republican to join our cause or back us. And so the main thing I learned in those years is that the politics in Wisconsin is what I like to call 2 types, politics A and politics B. And politics A is played by the wealthy interests who pour tons of money into the political process and the ruling party in Madison. And politics A kicks into gear when the legislative session starts, and that's when the bill comes due for those groups. And politics A involves removing environmental protections, removing air quality monitors, making it easier to fill in wetlands. Politics A involves taking public funding from schools and sending it to voucher private school programs. Politics A involves giving big tax breaks and subsidies to those groups that pour millions of dollars into the process. And politics A involves going to remove local control from communities and counties and municipalities who just wish to set their own rules as they see fit for their region. And politics B is what we're doing right now. And politics B happens at election time. And those same people who just got done playing politics A come back to the districts, and they tell the parents and the teachers that they're investing in education, and they tell the hunters and the anglers that they're in favor of clean water and clean air, and they tell the workers that they're working for good jobs with good benefits, and they go to the town boards and tell those people that they're in favor of local control. So someone like me who follows Wisconsin politics every day, I find the current politics B to be an insult to my intelligence and a personal affront to me and my kids and everyone in this room, and everyone at the hundreds of doors I've already knocked on in this district. And those are people who are just trying to live their lives with dignity, and in my opinion, many of them are unbeknownst to them that the state government is in many ways actively working against them, and I'm running to do my best to try to fix that. So thank you.
In the interest of getting more questions answered, I would ask you, it's fine, applaud both of these gentlemen the first time, but let's not use applause for the rest of the evening, because it'll just slow us up, okay?
Well,
We're in Wisconsin, we're polite, we're going to applaud both of these people. They came here and took some trouble to be here.
Hello.
Well, hello, my name is Rob Staffschild. I think we have to turn that one off. Better?
Yep. It's still on.
All right.
Yeah,
use
that's
whichever
bad
one works
mic.
best.
How about that?
Oh, that's better.
All right. Again, I'm Rob Staffschild. I'm the current first-term state representative for this area in Assembly District 29.
It's been my honor and my privilege to serve for the people of the 29th Assembly District. A little bit of background about me. I've basically lived in New Richmond, Wisconsin my whole life. I have lived in St. Croix County my whole life. My mom and dad were both high school sweethearts from Glenwood City. My grandparents were all from the Glenwood City, Downing, Emerald area, on over to the big town of Wheeler, if you know where Wheeler is, which is outside the 29th Assembly District, but it's close. So I have a long family history of being here. This is where we call home. This is where my heart is. I went to college in Eau Claire, transferred eventually to River Falls, and just knew I was going to move back. I used to tell people when I was young that someday I wanted to move up north when I got older, and so far I made it a whole mile in life. I live 1 mile north of where I grew up. So I live on our family farm where I farmed for the last 30 years with my dad. Hand in hand, we do some crop farming there. And I have a 15-year-old daughter that attends public school in Richmond schools, and avid sportsman, a farmer. I got started way back. Aaron Prairie Township went through some rezoning, and some folks made some decisions for the local people there in Aaron Prairie Township about how their township was going to be zoned, which in my opinion took away some property rights. So that was 15 or 20 years ago, and I've always kind of been actively involved ever since, and it's kind of snowballed in. And in 2016 I ran for this seat, and this is my first term, so I'm seeking re-election. Other than that, I thank you for coming out tonight. I really thank you for being involved. I thank you for being engaged. It's often, as John knows, you knock on doors and it seems like people are all 100% engaged, or they don't really know there's an election going on, so that always concerns me. But thank you for coming out tonight.
Okay, now we get into the meat of this meeting. Okay, so this is not directed to one of you specifically, and since John got to speak first for the opening, I will direct this question first to Rob. There are no mental health facilities in western Wisconsin for those needing the inpatient treatment. Why can't Wisconsin work with Minnesota, where services are available just across the border?
So mental health is something that I've worked on almost a weekly basis since I got elected. And I'll be honest, I'm not a very formal guy, so just in complete honesty, it's been the most challenging issue I've worked on so far, because we've literally made almost no headway the entire time. I've gone to meeting after meeting. I've met with regional people in the health industry, from Neillsville to Ashland to Eau Claire. We've had meetings in this building. I've met with the Dunn County Department of Health Services. I've met with the St. Croix County Health Services. And mental health is just something we don't go very far on. Now, when you're talking about a mental health facility, I believe what you mean is a Chapter 51 emergency detention facility, which is what's been talked about. I think it's actually absolutely horrible, the conditions that we treat our people for a Chapter 51 emergency detention. So like for instance right now, if somebody, so that's, for those of you that don't know, that's a court-ordered appointment for 72 hours to be detained for mental health purposes. And if that happens to you right now, law enforcement takes you to a hospital, and it takes forever for you to get discharged on a physical ability out of the hospital. And then usually we try to find a spot in Eau Claire, and there's hardly ever one there. Excuse me, so we end up taking you all the way to Winnebago. That's horrible. That's 5 hours just by itself, and you already probably spent 2 hours in the hospital trying to get discharged. So by the time you get there and get checked in, it could be upwards of 12 hours. And so I talked to the sheriff's departments for both counties. I've talked to the mental health people from both counties, and we've been trying to work on it. We looked at trying to use the old Baldwin Hospital and regenerate that. That doesn't work. And partly what we run into is some federal regulations on rural access hospitals. And if we add more beds to that, we have some issues. So I actually offered to pilot a pilot program in next year's budget to run for northwestern Wisconsin on subsidizing that program.
Thank you. Pass it on to John.
Well, in all honesty, I don't know why we can't work with Minnesota, and I don't know the rules and regulations that pertain to working with hospitals on the other side of the border. I will say that mental health goes hand in hand with the rest of the healthcare system, and seemingly to me a matter of priorities. And there seems to be so much money for other things and for other breaks and incentives that are given that it needs to be just a shift in priorities. And it's not to say that I think that this is all nefarious, but were I to be elected, I would be glad to work with experts in the field and to figure out exactly why it is that we can't partner with people across the border and maybe make a state-of-the-art facility in the western side of the state, because the population is growing in the 30th district and in the 29th as well, after the bridge was built across, and it is something that that needs to be addressed, and it goes hand in hand with the drug epidemic as well, and I would definitely work my best to find a remedy for that.
Oh, it's on, okay. So this question I will then direct to John, going back and forth, you see. State law limits the amount that taxes can be raised each year by counties and municipalities. Would you support repealing this law? We're talking about levy limits.
I would support repealing the levy limits at the township and county level. I've been to a lot of town board meetings in the district, and it's a lot of hand-wringing at every meeting, and their main focus is transportation and the roads, and they run into a tough time because they are elected officials as well, and the onus comes down on them and their position when they can't find the funding to take care of their roads. And I have heard from those people at the town board meetings that the levy limits are a problem. And again, a shift in priorities. If we could use some of the money that we give in breaks and incentives to other entities and other groups, and do some rural development and make it a priority, then maybe we wouldn't need to raise those levy limits, and it could come from the state and change the balance as to how much the state gives to the localities, at least the percentage, which has gotten smaller over the last decade.
Representative Staffold?
Well, like most issues, I think this is a very complicated issue, because on one hand, you have the ability of local townships to fund the services that they need to fund, but on the other hand, you have taxpayers that are making sure that it's checks and balances across the state. So one of the things I did, as John mentioned, we talked about transportation. We're trying to figure out, our rural roads are in rough shape. We're trying to figure out what to do with those. So I actually asked the Secretary of the Department of Transportation, Dave Ross, to come up, and he came up sometime this spring, toured the district with me and talked to folks from the county level and the township level, and we talked about all of the savings that Secretary Dave Ross has been able to, since he got in there, and we might not hit what the deficit is, but we're working towards that goal. So I think it's a little premature for that at this point, but let's see where those savings get us, and then let's readjust after that.
Thank you. This next question has to do with wetlands. It's kind of hard to bring this together here, but we in Dunn County are very concerned about the water situation and impaired lakes in the state, and we have nitrate contaminated wells. There is a concern about Act 183, the wetlands bill, which I'm going to start with Rob here, which Rob Staffold authored. I'm not pronouncing that right. Is it Staffold?
Staff is in the staff of people. Staff show.
Staffold. Thank you.
Close enough.
Rob authored this bill, which increases the filling of wetlands in Wisconsin. It was signed into law in March 2018. Who in our district benefits from filling wetlands? Who is harmed? I'd like you to speak to both points.
Sure. Just a point of clarification, I co-authored that bill. I wasn't the original author, and I signed on partially because I was concerned about the way that bill was going. That bill ended up being a lot better more compromised bill than what it started off to be, hopefully because of some of my influence. And I saw some of the things I was concerned about get implemented in that bill. You know, I think, I'm not sure if it's on my website yet, but it will be shortly. There's a video clip during the Senate hearing on that bill. Kyle Aurora, who's in charge of 21 states for Ducks Unlimited, who is vastly important on wetlands, along with the Wetlands Association, but Kyle stopped his testimony to actually thank me for being involved, thank them for keeping me involved, or for keeping them involved, and thanks for the work I did on that bill to make it a much better bill than it was. So as the co-author, I hope I made that a lot better bill. To get to the part about who benefits, I think every homeowner does. One of the provisions in that bill is we're talking about isolated versus non-isolated wetlands. Non-isolated wetlands are exempt from that bill, which is probably 80% of the wetlands in the whole state. Those are federally regulated. They're continuous by a water body or a drain system, a creek, a river, etc. So those are exempt from this bill. What we're talking about is the small wet spots in fields or that come about in like a housing development where you have one house on the hill that gets developed and they landscape their yard, and then the next one goes down. And by the time you're done, if there's 6 housing lots in that housing development, all the water settles on the last one, which creates a wetland. That's not, in my opinion, that's not an original wetland, and it's a man-made wetland. So what this bill does is allows that land to be re-landscaped and then pass the water on farther down. The other part about this bill is it really preserves the high-quality functioning wetlands out in the areas where they're wanted most. So for every 1 acre, they have to replace those with 1.3 acres somewhere else.
Thank you.
Well, I was following this bill from the time that it started, and I see things differently on it. And of course, I was not in those rooms where it was hatched at the beginning. But I did watch the testimony, and I heard some other representatives who were staunchly opposed all the way through, and some environmental groups, including the conservation voters, stayed opposed all the way through. I know the Ducks Unlimited and Pheasants Forever were initially opposed, and then they just went to neutral, so they didn't end up being in favor of it, if my recollection is right. And you know, in the articles I read and the testimony I heard from other representatives, and just the basic way things seem to be going as I follow, this was more done at the behest of developers and who want to develop areas in and around larger cities. And I think that the mitigation program is not sufficient enough. I think it doesn't take into account the decades and centuries long process that it takes to build quality wetlands, and nor does it take into account the importance of them, which we've just seen in the recent flooding. They are there to not only help prevent floods and mitigate the floods, but they are there to purify the water that comes out. And I think that when developers and people think that they can play God and set up a wetland in some other part of the state, then that's not sufficient. And my question always with these things is, does anybody think that after a decade of this type of development and nonstop growth, that any of the interests involved will come to a point where they'll say, that's enough. You know, that's enough wetlands developed, that's enough, because we need people to have nice habitat, we need all the benefits that wetlands bring, and I don't think they will. I think everything is seen as a commodity these days, and it's chewed up and spit out, and we got to put a stop to it pretty soon.
Thank you. I've been reminded that I should be consistent in how I address you gentlemen. So I'm going to start by using your full name, but good. Is it okay if I just say John Calabrese, or do we need Rocco in the middle?
Just say John.
Thank you.
How about John and Rob?
John and Rob. Okay, they voted. Dunn County had one of the strictest shoreland zoning in the state. I was actually on the county board when we were working on that to begin with. And now it has been rescinded because of state law changes. What is your viewpoint on local control? John, start.
Well, that's a big question. What's your viewpoint on local control? I do know that over a century ago that Wisconsin led the way in having something in their constitution that provided for the localities to set their own laws, and there was a point of pride for the state, and the removal of local control in all sorts of areas is done so that large businesses and people who employ tons of people, including developers, they don't want to have to deal with various localities setting their own rules in terms of wages for workers, benefits for workers, and all sorts of other rules. And so if you follow closely, you see a systematic removal of local control in all sorts of areas all across the state. And I think it's very troubling. And in terms of the shoreland regulations, something that really concerned me about that was not just that it could retroactively rescind a lot of rules that were made in various places, including Dunn County. There's a stipulation in there, and there's a sentence that I never forget because it's going to be very critical going forward, and it's law now. And this is in what they call the Homeowners Bill of Rights, and it says in there that public comment can no longer be the sole purpose that a conditional use permit is denied. And that's what it says in a sentence in a law. And Senator Tiffany, who helped write that law, was interviewed on that very sentence. And he said that there were people who filled out the forms and paid the fees, and then, as he put it, a group of just a small group of activists got together and could block a whole project. But it doesn't say a small group in the law. It says public comment can no longer be the sole purpose. So what that means is if 90% of the community doesn't want it, it's still going to go. And it's very troubling, and I think that the people in localities need to have more say than the people who can pay to wander the halls of Madison.
And Rob, your response?
Sure. We, in John's response there, he kind of combined two different laws. One's the shoreland zoning, which the question was about, and the other one's the Homeowners Bill of Rights, but that's fine. Local control is how I got into this. 15 years ago, Aaron Prairie Township was zoned ag exclusive zoning. My dad and some other kind of local neighborhood guys around the county board signed up for an additional ag exclusive zoning for a 20-year period, which gave it an additional tax incentive. That's why you did that back then, which limited the development potential for the township, which was fine because it's all ag land. We farm there. So what happened was 20 years later, nobody could find the expiration date, and all of a sudden we were locked into ag exclusive zoning forever. And you combine that with the neighborhood next door, which was Richmond Township, and they didn't have that, so they were allowed to sell 2-acre lots. And now some of you might be thinking, well, we just wanted to develop our farms and make $1 million, and that's not the case. What it was is I'm a mile from the township line, and that local control decision that was taken away made it so that the neighbor a mile from me's land was worth $5,000 an acre, and mine was worth $2,000 an acre. And if we tried to buy the farmer that was retiring between us, he's at a 40% loan to value, I'm at an 80% loan to value, for no other reason than somebody else somewhere in the government decided what we're going to be zoned. So that's how I got involved. So local control is near to my heart. Sometimes I think local control can overstep its bounds. It doesn't always listen to the individual people and the members that are part of its geographic area. Obviously, some of these laws that come forward are, we hear from our constituents. People call my office, they send emails to my office, and those are the people we listen to. Those bills don't just come out of thin air. They don't come from some developer somewhere that says, hey, why don't you do this? Those are reactions to what people in our area, in our districts, and in those local townships, those are reactions to what those people are concerned about that their local control government is not listening to.
Thank you. Okay, then this one would be, starting with Rob and going to John. The Supreme Court has referred the redistricting issue back to the state of Wisconsin. What are you willing to support to develop fairer elections in Wisconsin, such as the so-called Iowa model?
I've looked at that, excuse me, and people ask me what I think of the redistricting, and quite honestly, I've looked at this district, and for those of you that don't know, and it was an eye-opening experience to me when I got elected, the science behind politics in the state of Wisconsin and across the nation is unbelievable. They know what ward in Menominee, in the city of Menominee, votes higher Republican versus Democrat. It's a super scientific thing. And as just kind of a local country farm kid, I was a little bit oblivious to that, so that was a kind of an eye-opening experience. But you know, when you talk about redistricting, when I found that out, I looked at the map. In this particular district, I think I benefit no matter which way we go, to be honest with you. So on a personal level, I'm all for redistricting, but as we talk about things for the state, you know, we have to represent the equal number of people, and I think that's important to make sure that we do that. Now there's gerrymandering, and I don't think anybody, you know, doesn't think that these borders and these lines on these districts aren't a little screwy, but that's been going on by both parties for years and years and decades. So if we want to switch to something new, we just need to make sure that it's fair and that it's well represented of the people, and that we keep the same number of people represented underneath each geographic area in each assembly district.
I'm entirely in favor of looking at the Iowa model and the California model. I think that every time it's brought up, there's a lot of discussion about how can it possibly be nonpartisan, and I think we have to acknowledge that everybody has their own views, and you're not going to have robots do it, and there is a scientific way that it can be done, and it has worked in Iowa, and it's not just a group of all-powerful people who set the rules. They have to put them together and then present them back to the legislature, and then they approve them. And now in Wisconsin in 2010 and 2011, when they rewrote them, you know, some emails came forward from people that are just, I mean, obviously damning and giddy with the redrawing of the maps, and take this district out and that district out, and so happy that we're in charge, that we get to do this now, and you know, behind closed doors with some lawyers and people who are drawing the maps that people never got to hold accountable. And it's a big problem, because more and more with the big, huge dollars at stake, state government is no longer just a calm entity trying to make sure they do well for all the people. It's a big money-making business, and you know, you can say that both sides do it, and in some regard they do, but in Wisconsin for the last 10 years, the Republicans have made it a much bigger money-making business, and it's because they've been in charge. And I think that if we remove the ability for whatever party's in charge to draw their own maps, because there's always going to be that tendency to want to draw it in your favor, we need to look at that really quickly, because it's not just picking your own voters. There are several districts that don't have any competition now. There are assembly people, a good handful of them running unopposed, and a couple senators as well, and it's unacceptable for regulations. So I'm all in favor of a separate body drawing those maps.
Okay. Now we have a question about campaign finance reform. Surveys have shown that 97% of Americans are concerned about money and corruption in politics. This is a double-barreled question. What is your vision about returning faith in government to the people? And how would you propose to reform campaign finance?
Well, I think it can never fully be reformed until we amend the Constitution to overturn Citizens United and a couple other decisions that came along before then that say that money is speech and corporations are people and have speech rights. But in the meantime, there are several things we can do, and I think part of our campaign that we're running here is kind of a you know, we're just a ragtag bunch of people who are really concerned with the district and with politics in general in this country, and we are running it with no big donations, no PAC donations whatsoever. And it's not just to portray ourselves as holier than thou. It's to set an example that it can and should be won this way. And so that's one way to start. Another way to start is that in 2015 in Wisconsin, some huge changes happened to the campaign finance laws. And I think the most detrimental one is that the campaign committees, each party has a campaign committee in the Senate and a campaign committee in the Assembly. And while Rob and I are limited in taking $1,000 donations individually from people, those campaign committees can raise unlimited funds and give of those unlimited funds to a candidate of their choosing. I know that in Rob's first run, he got over 20 grand from the Republican Party, and we did a radio interview the other day, and someone asked Rob if he took money from the frac sand industry, and he said he honestly didn't know, and I completely believe it, because there is this pool of money that just goes pouring into these parties, and they look around and they say, okay, you need 30, 40 grand, here you go. And nobody knows really where all that money comes from, and it leads to the madness that we're seeing at election time, and it needs to change.
All right. Just don't start my time yet, but I feel horrible tonight, so if I'm half as red as my face feels and I'm clearing my throat when John's trying to talk, it's not intentional. I apologize in advance. So, I agree with John. I think we're kind of bound by the Citizens United Supreme Court case. I don't know, you know, on a local or a state level, I think we're kind of bound by that federal law. So until we change that on a federal level, that's kind of what we're going to follow now. That was a two-barrel question, and I think campaign finance reform, you know, John and I probably agree that it's egregious how much money gets raised in these political campaigns and how much money gets spent. And I appreciate the fact that John thought that he believed me, that I honestly didn't know if I had received a check from a sand mine or not. So I think that's important, though. When I say that, you guys are going to be a little shocked that I wouldn't know, but at the same time, I also don't know because it wouldn't change how I voted. I vote based on what I believe. I vote based on what I think is right for the people in this room and the people in my area and my family and my daughter and hopefully my grandkids that she hasn't even thought about yet. So that's how I choose my vote. And if people that sent me money disagree with my vote, then they probably won't send me money next time. But you know, for $500 or $1,000, I'm not willing to sell my vote for that much money. So it really has no bearing on how I vote when I get to Madison.
Okay, both K-12 and UW funding have been dramatically cut for the past 8 years. The UW system has also had frozen tuition for 6 years. Describe your view on how education can be refunded and we can regain the quality reputation we once had.
Well, those are two distinctly separate things, but let's try to lump them together. I'm absolutely amazed and excited about what a great job UW Stout does here in Menominee. Every time I talk to those folks, I talk to Chancellor Meyer or Doug Mell, I'm amazed with how intuitive they are with the dollars they get and how they get their return on their investment. And I really believe that UW Stout is one of the most unique campuses in the entire state of Wisconsin. So that being said, part of the reason we did the tuition freeze, and I voted for that last time, was because we were concerned that college education wasn't affordable for common people. You're talking about $100,000 to get an education, and when you get out, you're going to make $40 or $42 or maybe $35,000. That takes an incredible amount of burden on those young people, and a lot of those people are first getting married and they're trying to buy a house, and the reason we did that was to try to create an affordable education for those people. So if you're going to the K through 12, again, this is my first term, but the first time I got in, I voted for a budget that put over $600 million back into K through 12. And I know some people in the room thinks that that's part of replacing what was gutted earlier. Some people think that was a lot of money. I'm proud of that vote. We put $600 million back into K through 12, and I think that's a good thing. Whether it needs to be more, we can look at that the next budget. So, thank you.
Well, I met with the Stout Chancellor a couple weeks ago as well, and the first thing they talked about is money. And you know, I think it's an interesting thing that's happened in our culture in the relative demonization of higher education, and the notion that there's just a bunch of lazy millennials hanging out, partying, and not going to school. And I think a good college and a good town like Stout is, and all the other UW colleges, it kind of builds in concentric circles throughout the community, and it needs to be funded. And how can we refund it? It's just by changing our priorities. And the same thing is with the K through 12. I think that attack on the teachers and on the schools was legendarily egregious, and I think it wasn't about tightening our belts. It was about the powerful union that the teachers had and taking it apart piece by piece. And now with the money going towards voucher programs, I think that should be completely eliminated. I think it's madness in this district. I don't even think we have the opportunity for school choice. And I think that is also something that, in my opinion, is not done by legislators who have a noble idea of offering choice to people. I know there are groups that benefit financially from those vouchers going to private schools and often religious schools. And so you need to prioritize your public education, you need to prioritize your university system, because we all benefit, because those students want to stay in the area and they want to have good jobs. And if you fund that, and it's not just the tech schools, which are very important. I learned a trade myself. It's the arts, it's the humanities, it's the literature, and all of that stuff is immensely important to that, that part in our Constitution that says the pursuit of happiness, and the economy will grow from there. And we just need to shift priorities drastically.
Well, it's very convenient that you mentioned vouchers, because this next question is about vouchers and private schools. How do you feel the voucher system for private schools will affect the public school system for all?
Well, I've been in the midst of other things trying to research this quite a bit, and the school funding is an interesting topic that, with our polarized politics, it's hard to tell sometimes if you're reading just a straightforward analysis of where the money goes or not. But from what I've heard, and I've talked to some relative experts in the field, the funding that is set for voucher programs is set at a certain amount in terms of how much a school loses per pupil that goes to a private school, and that is more than the school would get from the state funding for enrollment in the school. And again, like I said, it doesn't make sense here. It doesn't make sense in all sorts of other districts around the states that doesn't have that opportunity of school choice. And I think we can get down into the semantics and the funding and the numbers and everything else, but I think that you can't have a discussion about this topic without talking about how it came to be. And like I said in my last answer, it's not some people who just decided that we want to have school choice. It's a systematic taking apart of the public schools, and there are groups, including our current Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, who benefit greatly from this, and her family and the corporation that she used to run. And that's where this comes from. That's how it's spreading across the state. That's why it's largely in Republican-held legislatures. And we need to put a stop to it, or the public schools will just be decimated. And it goes hand in hand with forcing schools, because of cuts of funding, to hold referenda. And a lot of people don't want to raise their property taxes if they don't have kids, if the kids are gone. And it causes animosity and battles within communities, and we just need to change the priorities and refund the schools, and again, everything will grow from there.
Rob, your turn.
Well, this seems like it should be a relatively simple topic. And so when I got elected, I went down to Madison and I said, I represent the people of the 29th Assembly District, so if it's not good for the public schools in the 29th Assembly District, I obviously can't be for this. But like John, I decided I was going to research it. And so for those of you that don't know, there's something called the Legislative Fiscal Bureau in the Capitol, and it's a bipartisan group. The Democrats use it, and the Independents and Libertarians, when they're elected, and the Republicans use it, and we all use it together as a resource center. And I said, okay, well, if we ended voucher schools today, what would be the financial reaction to the districts in the 29th Assembly District? And they gave me a report that was outdated. It was from 2015, and I've asked for a new one. It should be there sometime in the end of October, because it takes quite a bit of time. But in a nutshell, they told me that if all the kids that were in the voucher school system now was no longer a voucher school, and they went back into the Milwaukee public school system, and they've got it split up for 70% returned, 80%, 90%. 100% is pretty unlikely, so I didn't even ask them to do that. But if those kids went back into the public school system, it would change the school funding mechanism across the entire state, and our districts here in the 29th Assembly District, according to them, would actually lose money. Now, when you talk to the other side, they're saying that the public funding is going from our public schools to pay for these voucher schools. And it's an incredibly complex issue, so there's a lot of what-ifs in it. But what I know for sure is that I care about kids, and I care about kids specifically in our district. But as a state legislature, you have to consider the impacts across the whole state. And I've gotten to greatly respect a man named Jason Fields, who's an African-American legislator from Milwaukee, and he's a Democrat, and he's 100% in charge of, in favor of voucher schools, because he can explain to me how these failing schools create this entire society of kids that really don't have any future, and by having these voucher schools, they have a chance. So you have to consider that.
Gentlemen, I really appreciate your attention to the stop sign.
Red sign.
I appreciate that very much, yeah. If elected, will you support legislation that would reinstate collective bargaining rights for teachers and other public employees?
There's a little question, huh? No, I wouldn't. I think that I support unions. One of the best things I've seen so far is an all-union shop right here in Menominee is Red Cedar Steel Erectors, who, by the way, just got a contract for the Foxconn deal, which is the first business in our area, I think, that got one. But they're a union shop, so I support union labor. I support collective bargaining. But the problem with you have it in the teachers is it's a bit of a monopoly. So there's like, you're only voting against children or you're not voting against children. And I think it really opened it up, and the superintendents that I've talked to and the CISA 11 meetings that I've gone to up in Turtle Lake, those school administrators talk about the freedom that opened them up to do different things, and they can actually pay the best teachers the highest wages, and they can do a lot more variety of things with those dollars. So I would say no.
I would say yes. It's collective bargaining. It's not collective stealing, and it's the only way for a group of people to have a proper voice against either a board of in the CEO realm or the state or whoever they're negotiating with. And a lot of people remember, and I know that some people do talk about it, but I don't think it's talked about enough, how, a lot of times when we go back and forth with these discussions, it seems like we're supposed to be talking between two honest actors at the state level. And we have on video recording, you can all find it on your phone right now, our governor going to meet one of the biggest donors in the state, Diane Hendricks, and she said, how are we going to deal with these workers? And he said, we're going to do divide and conquer. And that's what it's about, because it just saves money for the people who want to keep us divided and want to keep wages low, and the teachers union got a little too strong. And I'm not someone who's all for union all the time, no matter what they do. It's like everything else in life and in government as well. You have to keep checks, and if there's something that happens where because of some old negotiations, the pensions went through the roof and we just can't afford it and something like that, then you can collectively bargain and make your case and lower that. But I just don't see in the last 8 or 10 years a couple of honest actors getting together and talking about tightening belts or doing something that's just for the fiscal benefit of everybody in the state. I think we need to reinstate collective bargaining rights. There's only 80% of people in public unions now, and we can see it in the relative flat line of wages and the vanishing teachers, people taking early retirement, and it's just not good for the state.
I've been told by our table of question sorters that they need some more fodder. Does anybody need another card to write a question on? We need some more questions.
Pass them around.
This is a question for both candidates. What is your response to the arrests by federal ICE in Wisconsin communities such as Arcadia, Madison, and central Wisconsin towns? I heard on the news Green Bay tonight. But that's just, I don't know more than that. What is your response to that? And I guess we start with Rob. Oh, was it you? Is it John? Okay, sorry.
I have heard a little bit about this. I haven't read too deeply into the details, but what I have seen from some people in the Madison area is that the ICE agents were not in contact with the local police, and I think that's a big problem. And there's all sorts of stories about that across the country, and whether you want to call them rogue agents or what. And we need to be working with local law enforcement for these arrests and for these crackdowns, and do it in a sensible way. And in broader speaking, you know, out here there's a lot of immigrants who work in farms, and we need to come up with a plan that allows them to come out of the shadows and be a part of this society. And I think, you know, state government obviously can't supersede the federal government in many aspects, but we can start to lead the way, and we can start to think about, do we want to get some sort of ID cards for people, because it's not just giving handouts and giving things away to people who didn't come here under the letter of the law. It's about safety. It's about people being ready and willing to report a crime if they see it, or you know, maybe they'll be scared because all of a sudden they'll think ICE will swoop in. And I think most imperatively they have to work with local law enforcement, or else then they don't trust each other, and it brings about some unnecessary animosity. And you know, at the federal level, which obviously we won't have any say over, I think it's madness. And I think that we need to address our immigration problem, and we need to do it quick, and we need to make it a much easier process for these people who we all rely on, even when we don't see them, to become part of our society.
Well, I agree with John. Some of the best folks I've met since I've been elected are law enforcement, whether it's our local city police or our village police, our county sheriff's deputies, and both of our county sheriffs that we deal with. I have not met one of those folks yet that wasn't a stand-up kind of person, male or female, that just devoted their life to protecting and serving the people of this area. So back to local control, if those folks are coming in on a federal level to do arrests in our local area, I urge our federal folks to make sure that they work with local law enforcement to make sure that that's done in conjunction, and that we're aware and we know what's going on. So past that, I also agree with John that it's a federal issue, and this office doesn't really have any responsibility over that. So thanks.
Well, this one is a short question too. What is your position on sensible management of guns?
Well, I was hoping I'd have more time to talk about mental health. So, you know, I think one person's definition of sensible management is not the same as everybody else. It's not a unified voice in that. So what I would consider to be sensible management in my house is educating my daughter and taking gun safety and talking about the life-altering effects of firearms. That's probably different in some other folks' house. So having that discussion, I think, is important. I think also that when you're talking about guns, and I'm sure that question's trying to get at some of the things we hear about in the news these days, you know, I think the use of that gun is a reaction to a mental health issue that we need to cover in this country. I've been one of the first people to say I would spend some more money on prevention instead of just reaction when it comes to mental health. Back to the Chapter 51 stuff is those people go through that process, and oftentimes, again, our law enforcement officers might see them a month later or 6 months later. A lot of times those people come back through, and one of the worst things about Winnebago is we take them over there, and then the next day we haul them all the way back in handcuffs again for their initial appearance. And if the judge says, yeah, you should really spend some time there, we haul them back to Winnebago, but then we leave them there. We don't have to go pick them back up, and the Sheriff's Department, both Dunn County and St. Croix County, is really pressed with their budgets, so they don't offer to spend the money to go get them. So now you've got somebody that finds their way back to St. Croix or Dunn County, and they're already agitated. The very next time our sheriff deputy goes to talk to them to see how they're doing, they don't want anything to do with them because you guys left me in Winnebago. So I know I veered a little away from the gun issue there, but mental health is something we just have to work on in this country, in this state, and in Assembly District 29.
I think we first need to make attempts with honesty to eliminate the stigma of just even talking about the gun issue. And it's the only issue you can think of where people lay out their bona fides right at the top and talking about how much they love the Second Amendment. Usually they don't do that about the other amendments. But the fact is, it's a tool that's dangerous, but it is part of our Constitution, and they are around, and it also is a big problem. There's 30,000 deaths a year, and so it's a government's job to try to solve the problem. If this many people were dying from gun violence in other countries, our State Department would issue a travel warning to not go to those countries. And so, you know, I'm not in the camp, and nor have I heard anybody really honestly say that they want to start taking people's guns away. But there are limits. We don't have rocket launchers. We don't have flamethrowers. And I think that we should look at military-style weapons and not allowing those to be sold. I think the chiefs of police back during the school safety debate, when the governor called a special session to bring people back, the chiefs of police and the New Richmond chief of police said this at a meeting I was at over there, that we need to reinstate the 48-hour waiting period for handgun purchases, if not a 72-hour like they put in Florida. It just makes common sense. Who needs to go and run and get a handgun right away? And you know, other things that just mind-boggling that don't get taken into account, like the armor-piercing bullets. I mean, the only people that wear armor are police. We need to be sensible about it and not be so frightened of addressing the issue out of fear that people think you're going to come and take their guns away.
What will you do to stop the continuous reduction in Department of Natural Resources staffing?
Well, if I don't get elected, I'll just keep complaining about it. But if I do, I would. It's another thing about shifting priorities, and the DNR is a big group with many tasks, but they have been whittled away because they're sort of the cops on the beat for many environmental rules that well-connected folks don't want to follow. And it's a very diverse state in its topography and its geology, and a part of our biggest, and I think going into the future, the biggest economic draw will be our tourism and our incredibly unique ecosystem and wilderness. And we need to treat it as such, and we need to bolster the DNR. We need to put more money there. We need to have biologists in every county, because it's not just to keep things beautiful, but things are deteriorating at a very quick pace, and because of the growing farms and the rollback of certain regulations, there's more and more contaminated wells and contaminated water, and we need to make it a priority and understand that continuous growth and continuous skirting of laws that lead to pollution needs to be kept in check, or else it won't ever be kept in check. And they are not a rogue institution that just wants to be bureaucrats and be mean to the people out there. They are trying to preserve the heritage of this state, which is one of our biggest points of pride going back in history, to Gaylord Nelson and Aldo Leopold and everything like that. And there is no place like Wisconsin, and we need to have an agency in place to keep people in check, because people have proven that they don't want to follow laws sometimes, and they can't be held, they can't take it upon themselves to not pollute and not do as they see fit.
Well, the DNR is the biggest agency in the state as far as budget and total resources, and I think I was surprised when I got elected and got to Madison to figure out, excuse me, just how big a vast array of things that DNR is actually charged with being responsible for. But I have no problem putting biologists in every county. I'm vastly concerned about our natural resources and our public lands. I'm a hunter, a fisherman, and a trapper. I'm also a conservationist, and I find that the older I get, when I'm hunting, the less animals I harvest and the more I let go, so I don't know what that means. But you know, one of the things that concerns me the most is I can remember when my grandpa would tell my dad how things used to be. And then my dad would tell me how things used to be. And now I find myself telling my 15-year-old daughter how things used to be. And I think about the contrast from my 15-year-old daughter to my dad's grandpa. And that scares me. I don't know that we have any more farmed land that's farmed these days. We have less farmers who are all farming more acres of land. So the fence lines are gone, and the rock piles are gone, and some of the waterways are a little narrower than used to be. My dad and I, 30 years ago probably, 25 years ago for sure, were some of the first people in St. Croix County to do no-till planting. We started no-till planting our beans, and we've been doing it for the last 25 years. So those kind of things concern me. Our environment concerns me. And I think that those are things we need to look at going forward. A lot of you might not know this, but before I was elected, I worked for the Department of Agriculture, Trade and Consumer Protection as an invasive species trapper across all of northern Wisconsin doing invasive species trapping. So I'm well aware of the wide variety of resources we have across the state and the needs that we have.
Health insurance. What is your opinion on, in the future, accepting the federal Medicaid dollars that Governor Walker turned away?
Well, health insurance is a huge topic. It's one of the things that are crippling our families. You know, years ago I was a self-employed farmer, so I had to buy it on my own. I'm one of those people that got divorced. My wife had the health insurance, so I found myself paying for it for myself. So I have a real good idea on how much health insurance costs for people. And I think that whether or not we take or don't take the Medicare expansion in the future depends on what that program looks like. One of the most complicated things in all of politics, you can pick any issue, is ask me what something's gonna, you know, how would you stand on something in the future? It's almost virtually impossible to give you an honest answer until you actually see what that bill is. Excuse me, see the particulars in that bill and tell you. I'll tell you that, you know, a lot of Republicans are against Obamacare, want to repeal Obamacare. There's a lot of things I don't like about Obamacare. I think there's some things that are significantly wrong with Obamacare. But I think it was time that we had to take that first step. I think we can take another step and go forward from there, and hopefully take a couple more steps and make it better. So healthcare is a huge issue, and I'm committed to keep working on that for as long as you folks will let me.
Well, I think we should take the Medicaid expansion immediately, and in my opinion, it was not taken for political reasons, and that's unacceptable. And there's all sorts of estimates about how many people died because of that. And when I go out and knock on doors, it's the biggest issue that people talk about. How many people I've met and who are afraid of losing their home because their health care costs are going up, and the price of everything else is going up. There was what they called a Badger Care for All system plan introduced at the beginning of last session, and it never even got out of committee, and it wasn't even exactly what it sounds like, a Badger Care for All. It was basically just raising the threshold for people to enter into Badger Care. And I would be in favor of a Badger Care for All system, and I know it always sounds daunting in these days because our national health care is an international scandal, and it would free up businesses, and it would free up the economy. I mean, imagine a business who doesn't want to hire a person or two because they have to pay for their health care. It's a long, sordid, weird story dating back to the 60s and earlier about why it is that businesses are supposed to be tasked with taking care of people's health. And I mean, I see it as one of the biggest priorities in the country, and I think it's been a tough go in states that have tried to do it on their own, in Vermont and New York and California, but I think you just have to keep pushing, you have to keep pounding it home, and you have to use the resources at your disposal to, open more nursing homes and take care of, instead of them closing, and make it a priority. And it's all about shifting priorities, and we got to stop believing that we can't do it, because we must do it.
What are your views on climate change and how rapidly its effects are encroaching? What do you feel is the role of state government in addressing climate change?
I'm very concerned about climate change. It's one of the main reasons I first got involved in politics. Just reading about it, 20 years ago. And what's startling, and it's I remember hearing Jeff Zucker, the head of CNN, a few years ago. I read an interview with him where they were asking why they don't talk about climate change more, and he said it's just not it doesn't get ratings, and it's a sad state of affairs of our media and everything, that we are literally talking about the extinction of human existence on this planet, and we need to call it for what it is, that there's 97% of the world's scientists that are not only drastically afraid of it, but their projections from 10 to 15 years ago weren't nearly drastic enough, and it's quite possibly the biggest problem the world faces, and it's awful that we pulled out of the Paris Climate Accords, which weren't even that strict in my opinion. And it's, I think at the state level, we can do what we can to move to renewable resources. We can give people incentives instead of disincentives to buy electric cars and fuel-efficient cars, and make it a priority. That's what you got to do, and we can lead the way, and we can put up more wind farms and do more solar, and show people how it's done in what should be the most environmentally friendly state in the Union.
Well, I think federal regulation on climate change is just that. It's mostly a federal issue, but from a state perspective, the impacts that we can have are on the renewable energy sources and do more efficient things. One of the most exciting things I've done on this issue lately was I went to a conference at St. Croix Electric Cooperative, which encompassed a whole bunch of other electric cooperatives. But I got to actually talk about their solar farm. They have a small solar farm right on St. Croix Electric in Hammond's got a small solar farm right on their facility there. And that was their first one. They tried it. And it went pretty well. So they actually partnered up with a couple partners, and they built one just outside of town, and I don't remember the exact acreage, but it encompasses almost 30 acres in solar field. It's an amazing facility. It does really great things, and so as a fiscally conservative Republican, you're always worried about how much money it costs the taxpayers. And one of the things they told me was the subsidies on solar are going to expire, I believe, in 2019, and they don't think they need them anymore. So one of the most exciting things is the technology has changed so much for these renewable energies that they're going to be open market competitive. It's going to be a free market, and people will actually compete to put those up, and they'll make money off selling the power back onto the grid to the power company, which I'm not 100% sure how the cooperative thinks that's a great idea for them, but they were all on board as well. So on a state level, keeping up with that tradition, keeping our technology going, and making sure that we're innovating and we're moving forward, we're using the technology to try to expand that as much as possible is what I see our role there.
What are your thoughts on CAFOs? Do you support local control to address the problems of CAFOs? You're right. Confined Animal Feeding Operation is what CAFO stands for. Whether they be dairy cattle or beef cattle or turkeys or chickens or pigs, thank you.
Yes, CAFOs, and just to elaborate that a little bit more, it goes by animal unit, so one milking cow is not necessarily one unit because there's multiple chickens to equal the one unit. So when you're talking about a CAFO, it means different things based on the different animals you have. But in general, CAFOs are what you see as the large farms in our community. We've had some issues with some of those. And Emerald Sky Dairy, I'm sure is going to come up, and that's been one of the ones that's been in the news a lot. They had a manure spill, I'm going to forget the month, but a little while back that went unreported. And one of the problems was it was supposed to be self-reported. Yeah. So I think there's improvements to be made there. I think that we're all in this together, and I think that, you know, watching those farms is one thing, but I think we can't just specifically pick out those farms. I think this environment, whether you're a small farmer, a big farmer, a corporation, or just a family living in the country or in town, we all have to think about what our impact is on the environment and what we can do better. So as far as the CAFO farms go, they're regulated by DNR. They're actually probably more regulated than small farms, aren't regulated hardly at all. So I think those restrictions are in place. I'm open to talking about penalizing the bad players in the game.
From the research I've done, CAFOs fall under in different categories. It's not just one massive cow farm, like you say. They're all for all sort of different animals, and so I don't think that you can make a blanket statement about the nefarious nature of all the CAFOs. That said, we are in a crisis situation with our dairy farms, and over 500 have closed last year, and I think the pace is 37 a month. And we need to decide what it is that's important to us and important to our heritage of the state from an economic standpoint and from an ecological standpoint. And in terms of the Emerald Sky Dairy, what I know is that the folks that own it don't live in the area. I know that some people who do own CAFOs do live in the area, but you know, I think we need more DNR people around to regulate them. We got to get rid of any rules that say that they can self-regulate, and I think we have to reach a point, if it's now, it might be now, where we just stop them, where we just put a moratorium on them, because the state is not expanding in land size, and there's only so much room, there's only so many resources, and in the last legislative session they've changed rules on drilling high-capacity wells and the oversight of re-drilling them and checking them. And these large CAFOs, not in all circumstances, but in many circumstances, are like any other big corporation where they are just going to look at the next quarterly profit and they're going to push and push and push. And there's examples in Kansas and Nebraska where riverbeds are dried up, and we cannot let more of these come in. We cannot let them skirt regulations. I mean, they have to have a tight hold on them. And I think we need to consider a moratorium until we can get a handle on it and get a handle on the hemorrhaging all the small dairy farms.
I need my glasses for this question. I can read the handwriting, but I'm not sure of a couple things. We are closing in on the last 3 questions, and then each candidate will have some time to speak to wind things up. No, maximum of 5 minutes apiece. But I think that they will still be here after we've closed the meeting. And if you want to talk to them individually, I'm sure they'd be happy to shake your hand and hear your concerns for a short time. Okay, so what will you do about the digital divide between rural areas of the state and more urban areas? Robust broadband is not being addressed with adequate dollars in the rural areas.
Well, I would do everything in my power to address it and to get out to those places as much as you can. And I know that Wisconsin has been dead last in the United States in small business startups for the last 2 years running, and we need to shift the priorities towards the small businesses, and the best way to do that this day and age is to get them broadband service. And there are some things being done around the edges. I know that there's been talk of the white space, and I was at a town's meeting here in this room where they talked about that a little bit, and it has its upsides and its downsides. And you know, it's not just the Foxconn deal and the billions of dollars of incentives that go to that. It is constantly, all year round, including now when the session is not in session, where they are giving huge incentives and breaks. There's one that just happened that the WEDC did a couple weeks ago to a company called Badger Meter, and $250 million of incentives, and the Kimberly Clark thing that they're pushing for right now. That's the company worldwide is a $3 billion profitable company. The CEO made $3 million last year. The COO made something similar, and these are companies that don't need the breaks that we're giving them. And so you can just imagine what we could do with that money if those people didn't have so much say and so much sway, and we thought about the people out in the areas and trusted in our small towns and in those main streets that are closed up and those rural areas that are out in the hinterlands, because it's a magical time with our technology. People could have a business and they could be secluded, and we just need to make it a priority.
Broadband's huge. So unlike mental health, broadband is one of those things that I've worked on since I've been there and have actually made progress. Your first year in office, they call you a freshman legislator, and it's relatively unheard of that you get to have secretaries and department folks come up, but I've begged and pleaded and even talked gruff to a few of them, and I got Angie Dickinson from the PSE to actually come up to the Assembly District 29. We had one meeting with her closer to Menominee, just north of town here, and one way over in the northwest corner of Assembly District 29 in Star Prairie Township. I think it's crucial that we keep trying to get these grants for our local area to expand broadband. I also was one of the people that wrote a press release and urged the federal government to deregulate the white space. Now, I don't think white space is the cure-all, fix-all. I don't think any of these things are. I think it's just another tool in the toolbox, and the more tools that you put in your toolbox, the easier it is to fix the problem. When Angie Dickinson came up, one of the things in Star Prairie Township we talked about was everybody kind of agreed that they didn't have broadband access, but nobody knew what to do about it or how to go about getting these grants. And I think one of the things that not everybody realizes is it's kind of up to the township and the town board to propose a project, and then PSE will find the provider, the company that handles that area, and they kind of do the grant application through them. So, excuse me, I've worked really hard to try to do broadband expansion. A funny story on the side is the Democrats in the Assembly have their caucus, and the Republicans, we have our caucus, and that's where we have our little strategy meetings. But when we were doing the budget, one of the things they talked about and was proposed in our caucus, in the Republican caucus, was to provide laptops to every school-age children, I think 9th through 12th grade or 10th through 12th, something like that. And a bunch of us rural folks up here raised our hands and said, what are they going to use those for? Because we don't even have dial-up in some spots. They're awful big for paperweight, so that's where we got some of our money for the grants and for the broadband expansion. Was instead of laptops, we got grants.
Do you see yourself able to reach across the aisle and co-author bills with members of the other party?
Absolutely, and I've done that. Don Verwink was a freshman Democrat assembly person was a 42-year teacher, retired and got elected to the assembly the same time I did. And Don and I talk all the time. And we disagree plenty, we agree plenty, and we go to lunch often. So the ability to get Don's perspective on things, and he comes to my office and says, hey Rob, what do you think about this? And sometimes I said, you know, that's just not where I'm at, or this little part here gives me a little bit of heartburn. And if that's not the part of the bill that's actually the core that he's getting after, if we can tweak that a little bit, we can work together. And I think that's one of the most important things in Madison, is people don't realize that over 90% of the bills that we passed this last session had some bipartisan votes. 9 out of 10 bills that we passed had bipartisan votes. You don't hear about those. You hear about the other 10% where we're divided. So I passed a bill on having more financial ability for kids in schools to learn more about financial literacy. And Beth Meyer, who was a Democrat from way up in Ashland, had some concerns about the specific language right at the last hour. And so I went to Beth's office, which apparently kind of floored her. She was surprised to see me walk in the door, but I said, you know, if we pass this, the the legislative council tells me that the legal language I used means the same thing as what you're proposing. And if you and I can agree that the intended outcome is this over here, we argue about the different language, how about this? How about if we pass the bill together, and then when it's done, I'll do a joint press release with you. And it floored her. So her and I did a joint press release. In fact, we did a video together. I think it's on my official state website. Beth Meyer and I at Christmas time talking about financial literacy and kids and how we work together for that. So the answer is absolutely yes. Nothing happens if we just pick our two teams and don't talk to each other.
Well, I'm in favor of definitely in favor of teaching kids financial literacy. My kids are already trying to get every toy off the shelf, so that might be a part of it. But I think that those 10% of bills that don't have bipartisan support are often the most crucial bills, and I just want to point that out before I really answer the question. You know, the Foxconn vote, the welfare reform package, the repeal of the mining moratorium. There are some of the most dangerous and detrimental bills, in my opinion, are in that 10%, and there are a lot of bills that go through, and so what I try to watch, and what I encourage everybody to watch, is those votes that you see where it's right down the party line, and you know, on those controversial bills that are in the news, it's a big deal if somebody goes away from their caucus. It is very rare, and they definitely talk about it. And I think that I'm in a unique position. I like to think so, because of my stance on money in politics. And I think that it's this day and age, the parties have become calcified, and in the Republican Party that's had control for the last 8 years, they march in lockstep. And I have no greater example than what I said at the beginning with the money in politics issue. I had, anecdotal, several staffers tell me of off the record that, yeah, their legislator is concerned with money in politics, but they can't do much about it, and because they're not going to touch that issue. And I'm sure that is the same with other issues. And I think me not being tied to any PAC, any committee money coming in from the Democrats, then I can honestly go into other people's office and do what I feel is most important for the people of the 29th and for the state.
Okay, this is the last question. I'm going to modify it just slightly. What 2 things would you like to accomplish if elected? The question was, what would you like to accomplish if elected? And would keep us here all night. So what 2 things would you like to accomplish if elected? John first.
Well, I think one thing would be to use whatever bully pulpit that a freshman legislator is allowed for the people back here, and to pound it every day, and to understand that this is a great job, and it's an honor. You get compensated in a very fair manner, and I think it should be a full-time job as much as possible, and I think you should get on your calendar every town board meeting, and anyone that you can possibly attend, you go, and you open yourself up with not being too tied to your caucus, from actually hearing the concerns of your people and taking it to Madison and floating it with other people. So real live representation untied to the big money interests that I feel so many legislators are is number one. And number two is doing everything I can to help the environment. You know, in Menominee, it's a big issue. There's this big, beautiful lake that not only you can't use, but it stinks in certain areas, and it's dangerous to touch and dangerous to get. You got kids and they want to go in it, and you tell them they can't go in it, and it's not an easy fix. I know that, but we have to start thinking of what's going on up the watershed, and we have to start preserving things for future generations and just changing the narrative and trying to put a halt to the ongoing growth and the hyper focus on jobs and the economy. And there is no economy without the environment and without healthy public schools. So, you know, be a watchdog, represent the people, and the environment. And I guess that's 3 if I can count.
If I am honored enough to represent you again next year and in the next biennium, it's going to, my primary focus will be healthcare. Healthcare, healthcare, healthcare. I don't know that there's anything else that cripples or influences or is a bigger burden on our families, our young people getting out of school, our old people trying to retire, older folks, seasoned folks trying to retire. It's a uniformly affected issue. It affects every peer group, every age group. It affects every race, every demographic we have. Healthcare affects it. We've got kids living at home longer to stay under mom and dad's health care. We got mom and dad working longer to keep health care. We got people not retiring because they need the health care. When we're talking about our retirement, our golden age, and trying to enjoy life after we've earned that, to have to plan that around how your health care works is ludicrous. So my number one thing, if I mention health care, it's health care. And the number 2 thing is education, because I truly believe our kids are our future. I think where this country goes, where this state goes, where this district goes, is all about education of our kids, whether that's our K through 12 system, a 4-year college degree, tech school, internships. I've been a big proponent of internships. I really truly believe in my heart that the trades are making a huge comeback. I think you can take an apprenticeship and come out of that apprenticeship program making $60,000 a year, and if you take a 4-year degree, sometimes you come out, you're making 40 with $100,000 worth of debt. So my 2 things, plain and simple, are healthcare and education.
Okay, I want to thank all of you who came tonight for your excellent questions. And now, we will hold, and second from John Calabrese, because they did it in the other order to start. So, Rob, closing statement.
I just want to thank again everybody for coming out and being engaged in the decisions. One thing I tell you, if I'm honored enough to earn your vote and honored enough to be elected to represent you, is I'm sure there's folks in this room that agree more with John than agree with me, and there's people that agree with me more than they agree with John. But I'll tell you this, if I get to Madison, call, email. If you and I don't agree on a policy, I'm always willing to listen. And I think if you ask folks, people will tell you that. I always take it upon myself to at least understand why someone who's politically different from me, I'd like to understand at least how they got to their position or why they feel that way. And I vow to keep that trend going. Send me emails. We try to get, we're not always, you know, the next day or the next 2 days, but we try to get back to them as soon as possible. We try to return phone calls. Another thing, a lot of you folks, and I've seen some faces in here that have made Egg Day at the Capitol or some kind of lobby day at the Capitol where you all come down and you come to our offices, and that's awesome. But I live here. It doesn't make any sense to me that we all get in a car and drive 4 hours away to talk to each other. You know, make an appointment with me. I'll meet anybody for coffee. We can talk about things. If you got an issue that's concerned, we can be respectful. We can talk about issues. and I'll give it my all. I'll really try hard to represent this district first and represent the people of this district. Again, I was born and raised here. My family's from here. My daughter goes to school here, and this is where I plan on be. So this is my home, and my heart is here. So I thank you all for your time.
Well, I can stretch my legs a little bit. Thank you all for coming, and this is really an informative thing, I thought, and I thank the league again for putting it on. Really wonderful to be a part of all this, and I've been humbled and really honored and pushed forward by all the door knocking I've been doing. At the onset, I didn't understand how all of that would make me feel, and it's an honor just to talk to people, even before the votes happen. And so what I would say to everybody here is, if I had a request, it would be to, in the next 42 days, do your research. And it's not just between Rob and myself, but any candidate that you see. Because this time of year, you know, my kids keep asking me what the hell I'm doing all the time. And I try to instill in them, even though they're pretty young, that this should be a glorious time of year. This should be a time when we, as Americans, come together and think about how lucky we are to still have the ability to vote, such as it is. And there's other countries that don't have it, and it was put together in a way that should fill us with pride. And this should be a time when we empower voters instead of discourage them. It should be a time when we're proud to be Americans. It should be a time where we calmly discuss differing ideas with each other and come to the table and make your choice in the ballot box. But instead, it's become a money-drenched insanity that turns out and turns off, I should say, so many people. I mean, the biggest constituency in this country is non-voters. And a lot of times you can't blame them. They're busy, and they're just turned off by the whole process. In my mailbox today, I got a big flyer with a picture of Tony Evers that made him look like a mummy, and it just basically insinuated that he's outside your daughter's window, creeping and looking at her. And then the same day, I got one from Tammy Baldwin that's as big as a blanket. And that's the third one I've gotten from her in 3 weeks. I don't know how many trees are wasted. And so I ask you to do your research and make it an act of civil engagement and civil disobedience to throw the flyers out and to ignore the ads and turn off your TV and just do your research. You call the candidates. Candidates are willing to talk to you and see what they stand for, and then maybe slowly we can bring it back to a prideful time and a time of fun and a uniquely American time. So that's what I would ask everybody to do, and I thank everybody for the opportunity.
I was going to ask you all to give a hand to these two gentlemen who took their time tonight to field a lot of questions, and I must say that they did very well. I would also like to present to you again that we have the press with us, and we're very glad to have them here, and if you'd like to talk to them afterward, I'm sure they'd be willing to do that as well. So let's give a hand to the press too. I know one of those people over there quite well, and she's not fake. And thank you all for coming out tonight. The league thanks you. Keep us in mind. If you're not a member already, we could use your membership. We'd love to have you. And talk to you another time.